Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, From No Budget to Funded, Finding Money for Safety and Workforce Initiatives. A quick operations note before we get started. Please put any questions that you have into the chat. We are going to have a question and answer session at the end. And maybe we'll be referencing questions that we find there during the discussion. Today, we're talking about one of the most common blockers we hear about from organizations looking to do more with data. That blocker is budget. We are going to talk about how organizations find ways around this blocker. Quickly, before we get started, for those of you who may not be familiar with Chmura, we partner with educational institutions, economic development organizations, corporations, and more, often supporting data-driven decision-making. We do this in two ways. One is with software, namely the Jobs EQ platform, and secondly, via consulting projects facilitated by our consulting team. A big part of what we see is clients and prospects planning important initiatives, especially around workforce and economic development, but running into funding constraints. That's what inspired today's conversation. Quick round of introductions. My name is Jay Gentry, and I'm the Director of Engagement at Chmura Economics and Analytics. I have over 20 years of experience in business development and strategic partnerships, working with leading organizations in the fields of ed tech, economic and workforce development, and higher education. And I'm joined by Craig Hunter, the Vice President of Customer Relationships North America at GrantGuru, to walk through their perspective on funding opportunities. Craig has 20 years of experience in grant strategy, working with all levels of government, economic developers, associations, tier one advisory firms, and listed companies to help them navigate the complex grant landscape. Craig, you have a few words for us.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. And thank you very much also to Chmura for inviting us to be part of this webinar. Probably the key thought is that our platform was actually, the initial idea came from economic developers in Australia. And so you'll have to excuse the Australian accent. Please put your hand up if you don't understand the colloquialism that I use. You can take the boy out of the country, but not the country out of the boy. So,
well, Craig, I would say that the Australian accent is always a bonus. So we're getting more than our money's worth here. To get started, we're going to take a quick poll. And everyone, if you look on the screen, you'll see in the top right area polls with the red dot. This poll is, what is the biggest barrier to move forward with your initiatives? And we're going to give you a minute to start responding to the poll. Well, it's seeming to be pretty consistent as the responses come in. Number one, difficulty finding funding, which is by far in the lead here. And then the second is lack of budget, which is obviously a cousin directly connected there. If you don't have it in the budget, then you need to be finding the funding. And this is consistent with why we felt that we should have this webinar. Just going to give it one more second, and I think that's it. Any surprises for you here, Craig?
No surprises at all, actually. It's very resonant to how and why we started in this industry. So, yeah.
So one of the most consistent things we see is that organizations already know what they need to do, whether it's training, workforce development, or broader operational improvements. And their priorities are clear, but funding becomes the limiting factor, which is exactly what the polling just reiterated. As a result, a lot of these initiatives get delayed or scaled back or become reactive instead of proactive. We certainly understand this, and that's the purpose of today's discussion. What's interesting is that there is actually a significant amount of funding available across all of these areas, and the real challenge isn't that funding doesn't exist. It's that it's difficult to find, to track, and to navigate. It's fragmented across sources, constantly changing, and often requires time that organizations just don't have to give. So what ends up happening is that many organizations who could qualify simply never apply. For those that do, there are a number of ways to approach this. Some go directly through government portals. Others work through associations or workforce boards. Some build internal expertise or work with partners. But no matter which route you take, the challenge tends to be the same. It takes time and it's easy to miss things. So we've got a second poll here. How do you currently look for funding opportunities? We'll give folks a minute here to respond. So far, this is looking like a much more even distribution across the responses. Two clearly in the lead with government grant portals and then internal research and grant writers. Our guess is that industry associations and workforce boards, it depends on the type of organization that you're part of. Anything of interest, Craig, as you see these results?
Yeah, and look, the thing that comes through over and over again is that, the grant portals are quite often focused on departments or states, and that is sort of a small straw of the total landscape of funding that's available. A lot of people don't realise that in some cases, corporations, large businesses are giving out double the amount of money in grants than are being provided even by the federal government in some industries. In some cases, it's 10x of overseas money seeking to find a place in startups or scale-ups or innovation companies within the US. And so, just looking through government portals is only one lens of where funding opportunities come from. And then the other part of that I noticed was obviously grant writers, and the grant writer's superpower is to do the application. We estimate that up to half of a grant writer's time anecdotally is spent searching for grant funding. And when their superpower is doing the application process, the more that you can automate the finding, then they can be doing what they do best.
Thanks, Craig. We had a response here from Catherine Stevens. She said, we use multiple sites, including grants.gov, state sites, and Candid, among other searchable databases. I'm not familiar with Candid. Have you heard that before?
Yeah, and so this is the interesting thing that, we track 20,000 different sources of information. And so, it's probably a little bit overwhelming expectation and unrealistic expectation for individual grant writers and economic development organisations to themselves be trying to track 20,000 different locations where funding potentially could be available for their organisation. And so, taking a bit of a hit and miss approach, we find can create the opportunity where you might be leaving money on the table. And so unifying it all into a single platform, we have found is the most efficient way, rather than, having to track multiple different sites yourself manually. So it's taking a much more scientific method is really where we see the best outcomes.
Well, Craig, that really resonates with us at Chmura because we do something similar with labor market data, meaning the reason we exist is we are aggregating and organizing complex information so that organizations can actually use it to make decisions. The Jobs EQ platform is one example, and then obviously the consulting team does the same in a more specific to the moment way. But yeah, that it is not possible to get the benefit of everything that's out there if you're taking a sort of one at a time sort of approach, and you don't have the tools to get to the actionable information. So.
Yes, it's that fragmented approach that you can see, doesn't necessarily represent the best opportunities and all the opportunities that a business might be able to leverage, particularly when they're making a decision about what state or what investment they're going to put in. And so making sure that an organisation is aware of all the lenses that funding can be provided from. And I suppose that's, to a large degree what motivated us to start GrantGuru. We used to take the approach that I suppose most of you are taking now. You've probably got a bit of a spreadsheet where you're putting together different websites that you're finding sources of information. And, we were doing grant writing for a long time, taking that approach. And eventually we decided we'd bite the bullet and we'd actually start to build a more comprehensive database to help our clients. Then some of the tier one advisory firms heard about what we were doing, and they asked if they could license that information, and they were using that internally. And then, interestingly, as I mentioned earlier, economic developers in Australia came up with the idea of, well, how about publicly facing that information to their business community and not-for-profit community? And so that's really where GrantGuru started. And economic developers were the ones that came up with the concept. And so now we work with 3/4 of economic developers in Australia. And we estimate that approximately 3/4 of the Australian population, one way or another, through either state government, local government, counties, or the federal government, is benefiting from our platform or has access to our platform. And since then, we've expanded globally. And so we're now the largest aggregator of grant funding in the world, with over 200,000 grant programs and $4 trillion in funding. And we've assisted our clients access over $1 billion through the GrantGuru platform. And as I mentioned, we work with not just economic developers, but we also work with state governments, corporations, advisors, not-for-profits. Probably one of the things that we have noticed, particularly in the US over the last 12 months, is a once-in-a-generation change to the government landscape at a federal level. And this is having a blast radius right through from the states to the counties, down to the local governments and the economic development associations. And what that then does is, because that there has historically been a very deep knowledge of what the existing programs are, the grant strategy has been to apply to very well-known programs through the same department. And since that change has occurred at a federal level, we realise that there is maybe a gap in the market in relationship to developing a new grant strategy and then doing grant finding that's aligned with that grant strategy. And that skill set's really important, because state governments are currently being asked to do things that they may not be match fit to do. So where there has been funding that has been pushed down to the states, they, in some states, are having to develop the skill sets of grant making and grant acquitting and grant assessing that historically they haven't had to do in departments. For instance, the Department of Education or DHS, they have had funding pushed down that previously they haven't been given out, that has been given out at the federal government level. And so there's been a bit of a lag in them getting up to speed in the ability to do the grant making and the grant assessing. And of course, that then hits the ground in a very real way with local governments and economic developers. And so, the ability to be able to identify those funding sources because of the changing landscape, we see that probably over the next 6 months, there's going to be significant amounts of funding that are going to be very rapidly made available, and the opening and closing dates are going to be quite short. And so if you're dependent on a bit of a fragmented approach of, well, I've heard about this program from this consultant, or I heard about it at a conference, or I heard about a grant program in a newsletter, that can be a bit hit and miss. And so what we've tried to do is bring more rigor and the scientific method to being able to access that data and be notified of that data. And that's where we really see the value that we're able to provide. One of the, I suppose, challenges at the moment in that fragmented landscape, is quite often people don't realise that there's a significant amount of funding at the moment that's seeking to find a home in the US. And that overseas funding is something that potentially could be part of the capital stack when you are looking to fund projects and assist your customers get projects off the ground. And, when you're looking at a government website, quite often, as I mentioned earlier, they quite often are a bit myopically focused on their own department if it's at a federal government level and even at a state level. And then quite often those government grant finders might not have municipality grants or might not have county grants that are available. And so that might be missing out of the capital stack as well that you provide. Some people have asked me, where is the advantages and disadvantages of AI? And there are definitely some advantages. Probably the disadvantages is what's called the alignment problem, that AI is trained on dirty data. And so if you're to do a search of, downtown economic development for your region, ChatGPT will bring back 10 results. The first result is a grant that doesn't exist. It's actually a grant that ChatGPT just made up because you asked the question. The next grant out of that top 10 is probably a grant that you guys used to give out, your local government or your state government gave out 10 years ago. And then the third one is probably a relevant grant that actually is open, but the eligibility criteria that's listed on it isn't quite right. The other 7 grants are probably spot on. But the problem is chasing down the rabbit hole in relationship to that incorrect information that, your customers, your community, they just don't have the time to waste. And so we really work hard at being able to step around that alignment problem and filter out those hallucinations and inaccuracies that AI quite often bring to the table when you are just trying to do it through a raw chatbot. And then, the other thing that we have seen is a need for a trusted source and a single point of information that's a concierge, turnkey provider of information and data that's accurate in relationship to grants. Because the grants landscape is moving so rapidly that government are struggling themselves to keep up to date with changes that are happening at their own level. And so we've been doing this for 20 years, been mapping these data sources and making sure that there is really accurate, trusted information, and that you're not getting any surprises when you're generating reports in relationship to what all the funding opportunities are for the projects that you're looking to support. And so, as I mentioned, that GrantGuru is bringing in all levels of government. It's bringing in both federal government, local government, county, state government funding opportunities from right across the nation, Canada, Australasia, Europe. It also includes the philanthropic funding and then the private sector money. And so we've got a sophisticated way on the back end of being able to keep that information up to date. And so while we're talking right now, our database is just constantly being updated, and it's been cleansed, it's been refined, and we are then sending you messages. So depending on the project that you're looking to run and you're looking to support, we're constantly updating you with changes that are being made to the funding programs that you've shortlisted for your project.
Craig, how does that information flow when you're giving the updates? What's the format of that, or do you also have a mode of responding to, inquiries? How does that all flow?
Yeah, so we actually provide a dashboard in our platform, and so you're getting notified in the dashboard based upon the projects that you've created a short list of grant opportunities that you're interested in for those projects. And that dashboard is providing you with messages and links to the program with the updates, but that's also going through to your phone as well. Some people who are sort of right into this thing want to be notified daily. Other people only want to be notified once a week. Some only want to be notified of updates to programs monthly. And then we also enable that to be repurposed for your organisation to provide it in newsletter communications that you might be doing to your customer base.
So certain elements of the information provided, they can utilize for public.
Absolutely. And in some cases, we uniquely have economic developers that want to publicly face this information to their business community and not-for-profit community. And that is something that we uniquely do. So just to give you an idea of the mix of funding, as you can see, there's global funds, which that changes, as I said, week to week, month to month. Federal government obviously is the lion's share of the money. State government, has got probably the most amount of grants, but less money is being given out. Private foundations there's an enormous amount of programs in there, and that is really detailed information that we provide. We provide the historical information of grants that they've given out previously. We also provide a word map, so you're making sure you're using the right terminology, because philanthropic grants quite often have got their own lingo, and so we want to make sure that you're using the right language and what states they fund, and also in relationship to who the key contact people are, so you can do some direct business networking with them. And then, of course, corporate funds. In some instances, corporations, as I said, they're giving out double the amount of money, if not 10 times the amount of money that's been given out by government in certain industry sectors. And so really what we start seeing is companies quite often will come to us first. This is just one example with data centers, obviously, is a very hot topic. And, the workforce challenges that go on there, and the pushback that currently happens in communities about not necessarily wanting a data center because they think it's competing with their power, or it's competing with their water, or it's bringing pollution, or it's taking up valuable land space. And so we see organisations that come to us that are looking for funding for their business before they start diluting equity in their organisation. And so that's also another driver. And then we're able to, in some cases, aggregate that technology so that they're able to provide solutions to communities that drive economic development, while at the same time taking away the detractors. As we know, data centers is one of the greatest developers of economic development that's going on at the moment. And that is great for communities, but there also can be downsides. And so bringing technology to the table and helping those companies be well funded to get their projects up is something that we really pride ourselves in being able to do. So that, I suppose, gives you a 10,000 view perspective. As I said, one of the things uniquely that we do is then publicly face our information. We find that publicly facing your the grant opportunities that are available in your region and the non-for-profit can be a real stimulus of economic growth. But we also find the ability to provide businesses and key stakeholders within your community grant strategies for when they are looking to do new innovation, build a new factory, any new developments they're looking to do, that your ability to use a platform like ours to very rapidly build the capital stack that supports that initiative, we find helps bring your key stakeholders closer to you. And then we also find that it's really powerful being able to communicate through potentially newsletters, or being able to communicate through your website new programs that might be relevant to those key stakeholders. Once again, that thing just creates a stickiness in those relationships.
And Craig, am I understanding you correctly that in some cases this is allowing funding to get down to the level of small and medium-sized organizations?
Yeah, that's right. So our largest customers are obviously tier one advisory firms, and they're providing this data to Fortune 500 companies to help them make decisions. But we very strongly believe in democratizing access to this information, and so being able to provide it to startups and scale-ups and not-for-profits, we think is really important that they are not missing out on the opportunities that they potentially could be leveraging. And so by having a single point that is lowering the barriers and lowering the complexity to be able to discover funding opportunities, we provide the ability to search just by prompt. And so rather than actually doing the traditional, I'm going to go and do finding and go and look at every grant, which is difficult to do. There's 200,000 grant programs in our platform. We standardize all 200,000 of those grants into a standard template, so you can compare like for like each opportunity and very quickly be able to assess the opportunity to be able to put your investment in an application. And that's really important for small and medium-sized companies, because they don't have the time to be chasing down a grant opportunity that might not be the right fit, and whether there's one that's probably a lot better fit. And at the moment, how do they know? And so by making sure that they're confident that all the opportunities are in one platform, and then being able to do a side-by-side comparison on a single page of every single grant program that they potentially could be eligible for, enables them to make a really confident and informed decision about when they're actually going to pull the trigger on an application, that this is the best program for them to be pursuing.
Well, that really does resonate in that providing trusted information that allows people to make good decisions, I think, is what aligns, is the same description of what's being provided by both GrantGuru and Chmura.
That's right. And we quite often find ourselves partnering with organisations to complement the data that they're providing to their customers, and being able to very rapidly provide a capital stack in a push method rather than a pull method enables you to quickly, as you're about to sort of go into meetings, you know what the project is, you can put that project into the platform and you can be pushed all the programs from federal, state, local government, philanthropic, business grants as a blended mix of a grant strategy that potentially could be relevant to supporting that project. And that is, quite unique in what we offer.
Right. So, Craig, if we take everything that you've provided and put it into the context of what can be done right now, it comes down to right tools, right partners. You can move projects forward. I think go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, one of the things is that, identifying the right opportunities, you don't really appreciate how much of a challenge that is until you're talking to economic developers that have been in the game for 20 years, that have relationships with departments, personal relationships with the heads of departments, that then start using our tool, and their key project they put into our platform. And the second grant that they identify is a grant that has been given out by their best mate in that department, and their best mate has never told them about that grant. and then you realize, when you get anecdotes like that, you realize that taking the approach of bumping into people and hearing about programs and going from one website to another website to another website to another website probably isn't the most efficient way to be able to identify the right opportunities. Relying on your mate to remember his own programs to recommend to you and your key project is taking a bit of a risk. And that your customers and your key stakeholders in your community deserve to have you take an approach that is far more rigorous. And that's really what we try to bring to the table in the tooling that we bring to the table, is that rigorous, systematic approach, so that you're not having to rely on someone to remember for you. Oh, that's right. By the way, I remember that you've got this important project going on in your community and you need funding, and we've got a program that fits it. When you hear anecdotes like that, you realize the importance of what we're doing.
Right. It seems like there are so many, quote, time-saving tools, but when you've collected all of them, but they aren't really saving you any time, what have you actually gotten as a benefit there?
Yeah, so it's the unification and the systemization of it, and once again, it's the pushing the data to you rather than relying on you to have to go and do the finding. That's where we find that it's a real game changer.
Excellent. Well, I want to take this moment to encourage everybody to be thinking about the questions that they may have to include in our discussion as we get closer to the end. As everyone is thinking about that, we just want to thank everybody for joining us. We'd love to be able to open this up for conversation with Craig. And I haven't seen more in the chat up to this point, but if we have any that are coming in at the moment, we'd love to be able to take some time to walk through it or talk through it.
So just while we're waiting, Jay, probably some of the anecdotes that resonate with me the best. Like I get asked, okay, well, what's been the best value you've seen by implementing your platform? And I can give anecdotes in relationship to individual projects that have been funded, that have enabled economic development within communities. But for organisations, I've seen, probably the best example I can think of was a business chamber at a state government level, and they implemented our platform and attracted 25,000 new members as a result of implementing our platform. And I use that anecdote just to provide an example of how important and how valuable the information is to business communities. That for them to increase by a quarter their membership just simply through implementing a tool like this, reinforces that message of how important and valuable having comprehensive data and knowing that they're not leaving money on the table, particularly in relationship to scale-ups and when they're looking to say, well, if we're going to invest in a new plant, we're going to invest in new product, we want to make sure before we give up equity and before we start taking on any private equity or investors, we want to know that we have exhausted any opportunities for us to be able to pick up funding. And so that's one of the things that we've found has been a really powerful element of implementing the GrantGuru platform.
Well, any organization that has membership should have their ears perked up from that anecdote. While we're continuing to wait for any questions that come through, we want to make sure that everybody is aware of resources from Chmura. These websites will allow you to either go through the Resource Center on our website or to ask for a demo for Jobs EQ. And in the chat, we see the website there, chmura.com in general, that you will be able to look through, and if you find what you need there, that's great. But we'd find that most people having a demonstration of the Jobs EQ platform is really what gets them the information, knowledge that they need. Craig, any last comments? I don't know. We're not going to wait too long for people to get their questions in if they're not coming in right now. So look, just once again, I'd like to just thank people for coming along and participating. It's really a privilege to be able to partner with Chmura on this webinar, and if anyone would like to reach out, feel free. We provide demos online. You can just jump onto the website and request in my calendar some time, and I can walk you through the GrantGuru solution and just do some demonstrations. You can have a free trial of the platform and try it out for yourself. We find that's the best way for people to get confidence that they're finding opportunities that they haven't seen before, and then that is generally the proof point for people to decide whether they want to continue using GrantGuru as their tool for funding opportunities for enabling their projects and stimulating economic development within their community. Excellent. Thank you, Craig. And I see we have something from Melissa here, CFO for the Birmingham Business Alliance in Birmingham, Alabama. Melissa, would you like to have? We'll both follow up with you. Just in case.
Yeah. And look, we do often have partnerships with regional business alliances that have got multiple counties and multiple states multiple cities that sit within those counties, and we provide flexible models to be able to enable people to get access to this data. The thing that is most important to us is to be able to democratize access to this funding. We see the Fortune 500 organizations take advantage of our platform the most. And, I love to use the analogy that, the only trillionaire walking the planet, his company would have made a loss last year if he wasn't taking advantage of government incentives. And so, really being aware that your business community and your cities, if they're not getting the advantages of this data, the county down the road is, and the region next door are, and their businesses are getting an advantage. And so, you basically don't want to be the ones that miss out on the funding when the music stops. And so that's probably where we see, getting that message across that having a more sophisticated and a more strategic way of identifying funding opportunities and it just being part of business, that's where we see that more sophisticated approach really advantage communities, and we see economic development flourish when people's IQ of funding opportunities has been raised and they've got a more sophisticated and intelligent way of being able to pursue it as business as usual.
Thank you, Craig. That is a great reminder. The people who have the best strategy and are mindful in the ways they're using the information available to them are the ones that are going to be winning. Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. We certainly hope that we'll see you at the next one, and please don't hesitate to reach out to us directly and to Craig. You see his email address here. We'd love to hear from everyone. If you have ideas about what you'd like to see in terms of a webinar, we also welcome that feedback as well. And Craig, with that, we're going to sign off, and thank you again for being our guest today. We really benefit from having this expertise available.
Thanks, Jay. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. All right. Goodbye, everyone.